The mailbox at the end of the Elgin driveway on Route 7 had been rusted shut for longer than Darius Cole had been home from Syria, and it was Duke who found it first. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, the first day of the job, and Darius had parked at the road and was walking the driveway perimeter before starting the equipment when Duke left his side and went to the box and sat beside it and looked back. Not alerting, not agitated, just doing the thing he had done for 7 years when he had found something and was waiting for Darius to catch up. The box was a standard rural route steel mailbox post-mounted, the red flag arm corroded flat. Darius opened it. Inside, in the dark of a metal box that had not been opened in what felt like decades, was one envelope. The paper had gone the color of old ivory. The stamp was a 34-cent flag stamp, the kind issued in 2001. The postmark read, March 14th, 2002. It was addressed to Warren Elgin, Route 7, Harlan, Kentucky, in the handwriting of someone who wrote carefully because they were writing something that mattered. In the upper left corner, a return address, Cecilia Vance, 114 Crestwood Lane, Harlan, Kentucky. Darius read the name twice. He did not open the letter. He photographed the envelope, put it in a labeled evidence bag from his kit, recorded it in his logbook, and put it in the cab of his truck. Then he stood in the October cold for a moment, looking at the 40 acres of the Elgin property, the farmhouse at the end of the driveway, the collapsed barn to the left, the tree line where the land ran to the back of the property along the creek. And he understood, in the way he had learned to understand such things, that he was in the presence of something unfinished. What Darius Cole found over the next 5 days on the Elgin property, and what Duke found before Darius did, as Duke had always done, and what a woman named Cecilia Vance had spent 23 years not knowing, and what she finally came to know on a Saturday in October, would not stay in the logbook. If you're new here, this is the kind of story this channel tells. Subscribe before we go any further. You'll want to be here for what follows. Darius had come back to Harlan County 20 months ago from his last deployment with a shrapnel scar along his left forearm that had healed with a partial nerve deficit, a grip that worked and a handshake that pulled slightly left when he was tired. He was 38. He ran a property clearing and estate preparation business, abandoned properties foreclosure prep, estate cleanouts, and he was meticulous about it in the way he had been meticulous about everything that mattered to him, which was most things. He kept a logbook of every significant object discovered on a job. He had developed this practice when he found a Purple Heart in a shoebox under a bed on his third estate cleanout, and had not known whose it was, and had spent 3 weeks finding out, and had understood from that experience that objects carry obligations that outlast the people who own them, and that the obligation passes to whoever finds them. He had come back to Harlan County specifically, rather than somewhere easier, because his grandmother was here, and because the land was the land he knew, and because he was a man who had learned that the place you are from is usually the place you need to be when you are trying to figure out what comes next. Duke had come from the Harlan County Sheriff's Department's retired detection dog program, a 7-year-old black and tan shepherd, heavy through the chest, deliberate in his movements, with the quality of attention that narcotics detection training produces, a continuous, low-level reading of his environment, everything filtered through the question of whether anything present is worth locating. He had been retired when a hip X-ray showed early dysplasia that was manageable with medication and lifestyle modification and incompatible with the physical demands of active detection work. Darius had adopted him from the program coordinator who knew Darius from the Veterans Job Fair where Darius had tabled for his business 2 years ago. Duke had been with him for 14 months and had in that time found 17 objects of significance on estate and clearance jobs, objects that Darius's eyes had passed over and Duke's nose had located. A sealed envelope in a wall cavity, a ring in the lining of a coat, 3 sets of military discharge papers in locations where discharge papers should not have been but were, because the people who put them there had their reasons. Duke found things. It was what he had always done, and he approached it with the seriousness of a professional who has not confused retirement with irrelevance. Warren Elgin had died on November 3, 2001. He was 67 years old. He had farmed the 40 acres on Route 7 for 41 years, since coming back from Korea in 1954, with a Bronze Star and a reticence about those 2 years that he maintained for the rest of his life. He had not married officially, He had been, in the specific and private way of men of his generation and his county, a man whose personal life was his own. The property had been in probate for 23 years due to a disputed heir claim between two nephews in Cincinnati. The dispute had settled 6 months ago, and the nephews had hired a Lexington trust administrator named Helen Park to prepare the property for sale. Helen had hired Darius. The farmhouse smelled of time, not decay. Warren had kept it well, and 23 years of vacancy had settled it rather than damaged it. The furniture was still there, the dishes in the cabinet, the books arranged with the care of someone who intended to read them again. The reading chair in the front room had a wear pattern in the upholstery that marked where a man had sat for 40 years. On the side table beside it was a coffee mug that had been there long enough to leave a ring in the wood. Darius photographed both. Then he walked through with Duke and let Duke read it. Duke went through the kitchen, the front room, the small bedroom off the hall, and then stopped at the bedroom door and looked at the bed. He went to the foot of it and sat. He looked at Darius. Darius knelt and looked under the bed. A cedar chest, pushed to the back, undisturbed in the specific way of things that have not been touched in a long time. A fine distribution of dust that had settled uniformly over the surface, undisturbed at the edges. He photographed it in place, then pulled it out. It was not locked. It had a simple hasp, the kind that requires no key, the kind a man uses when he is not hiding something from intruders, but from casual attention. Inside, a stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band, 3 folded letters, handwritten, a photograph in a paper envelope unsealed, a military discharge record folded with precision, a bronze star in its case, and a unit photograph 4x6, the kind taken overseas and printed at a base PX. 8 men in Korean-era fatigues, squinting into a camera somewhere in what the mountain shapes behind them identified as the peninsula's central highlands. Darius took the unit photograph and turned it over. On the back, in Warren's handwriting, 8 names. He photographed both sides. He read the names once and then read them again because one of them, Corporal James Aldridge, Fort Thomas, Kentucky, was a name he had heard, in the specific way names are heard when they are said late at night by someone who needs to say them and trusts you to hold them. Lieutenant Marcus Aldridge, his squad leader in Iraq, had spoken of his grandfather once. He served in Korea, said a man named Elgin was the best man he ever knew. And Darius had been 19 years younger than he was now and had not thought of it in a long time. But thought of it now, standing in Warren Elgin's bedroom, holding Warren Elgin's unit photograph. Marcus 3 years dead in a second tour Darius had not been on, and the way time collapses when you find the right object in the right room. He logged the cedar chest and its contents item by item. He did not open the 3 folded letters because they were not his letters. He photographed the envelopes. Then he read the outside of the envelope that Cecilia Vance had sent in March of 2002. Again, and he understood now why Duke had gone to that mailbox, and what Warren Elgin had been to the woman who sent it, and why the letter had sat in the box for 23 years. He opened one of the 3 envelopes from the rubber-banded stack, just the envelope, not the letter, and confirmed what he expected. Cecilia Vance, 114 Crestwood Lane, Harlan, Kentucky. Warren had kept her letters. He had kept them in a cedar chest under his bed with his military discharge and his bronze star. Darius put the envelope back and sat on the edge of Warren's bed for a moment. He thought about a village outside Deir ez-Zor, the meal half-cooked, the shoes at the door. He had spent 4 years carrying the image of a life interrupted in mid-motion, caught at the moment before it became something else. He was good, he understood, at recognizing interrupted lives. He had practiced at standing in the rooms they left behind. He had kept her letters. He called the county clerk's office that afternoon. He asked the woman who answered, Tammy, who had worked there 11 years, whether a retired clerk named Cecilia Vance was still reachable. Tammy said, Miss Cecilia comes to our Christmas party every year. She's doing fine. Can I ask why? Darius explained who he was and that he had found something on a job that he believed belonged to her. Tammy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, She worked here for 31 years. Whatever you found, you can trust me to give it to her right. Darius said he would like to call Cecilia directly if Tammy was comfortable sharing the number, and then gave it. He sat in his truck on the Route 7 shoulder for a long time before he called. He had a logbook and a photograph of an envelope and a cedar chest with a rubber-banded stack of letters and a bronze star and a unit photograph with 8 names on the back. And he had a woman's phone number, and he had to figure out the order in which the truth could be told without the telling causing more harm than the not knowing had. Have you ever had to give someone news that was both the worst thing and the only true thing? News that took something away and gave something back at the same time? Tell me about it in the comments. Or tell me the name of someone who deserved to know the truth and finally did. I read, everyone. He called her at 4:30. She answered on the 3rd ring, a voice that was older than he had imagined, and steadier, the voice of a woman who had worked a public-facing job for 31 years and knew how to receive what a phone call brought without letting it knock her off balance. He told her who he was and that he worked a state clearance and that he was currently working the Elgin property on Route 7. She was quiet. Then she said, Warren's place. He said yes. He said he had found something addressed to Warren and that he needed to tell her some things before he explained what it was. He said he was sorry for what he was about to say, and then he told her Warren Elgin had died in November 2001. The letter she sent in March of 2002 had arrived after his family came and went. It had been in the mailbox since. He had found it that morning. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture, not empty, not processing, but the silence of a person receiving something that rearranges the furniture of 23 years in one moment. When she spoke, her voice was the same, steady. The steadiness of a woman who has been holding something for a long time and has now been told the shape of what she was holding. She said, I thought he chose the silence. Darius sat in his truck on the Route 7 shoulder and looked at the mailbox at the end of the Elgin driveway and said, No, ma'am, he didn't choose anything. He was gone before it arrived. She asked, Did he have a good life? He said, I think he did. I think you were part of why. He said it because he had read the evidence, the cedar chest, the rubber band, the letters kept for 14 years, the bronze star beside them as though they were of equal weight, which perhaps they were. He said it because it was true. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, Come on a Saturday. I'll make coffee. He found the photograph of the two of them on the second day. Duke had been working the kitchen, methodical as always, reading surfaces and cavities in the specific way of a dog who has learned that significant things are not always in obvious places. He stopped at the wall beside the kitchen window and sat. Darius came and pressed along the baseboard and found it, a loose section of the wood paneling, old style, the kind installed in rural Kentucky kitchens in the 1970s. He removed the panel section carefully. Behind it was a paper envelope, unsealed, lying flat in the cavity, folded once, in the way something is folded when it is being made to fit a space. Inside, a photograph, 4 inches by 6, color, but faded to the warmth that color photographs go when they have been in a dark enclosed space for a long time. A man and a woman standing in front of what was clearly the Elgin farmhouse. He could see the porch railing behind them, the same porch railing he had cataloged on day 1. The man was in his mid-50s, lean, with a farmer's posture and a farmer's hands. The woman was younger by perhaps a decade, smiling with the specific quality of a smile given to someone who has surprised you by doing something right. Neither of them was looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. On the back, in Warren's handwriting, C and W, October 1994. He logged it. He photographed it. He put it in the evidence bag with the letter from the mailbox and labeled them both. Then he sat at Warren's kitchen table for a moment with Duke beside him and thought about a man who had kept a photograph of the woman he loved in the wall of his kitchen behind the paneling. In a house where no one else lived, he had not hidden her, he had kept her where he could reach her. He called Helen Park in Lexington that evening and described the cedar chest and its contents. He asked about the possibility of a personal effects clause in the estate settlement, specifically that Warren's personal correspondence and photographs be designated for Cecilia Vance, who was named in those materials as a person with a 14-year relationship with Warren Elgin. Helen was quiet for a moment and then she said, I've been doing this work for 22 years. I've been waiting for someone to ask me to do that for about 15 of them. She said she would draft the clause. She said the nephews would object. She said she would handle the nephews. Gerald Elgin, the older nephew, called Darius directly on Thursday. He said the letter and the photographs were estate property and that any personal relationship his uncle may have had was not relevant to the settlement. He said it with the particular efficiency of a man who has decided something and would prefer not to be asked to reconsider it. Darius listened until he was finished. He said, "Your uncle kept her letters in a cedar chest beside his bronze star for 14 years. I'm going to trust Helen's judgment on the clause." He did not argue further. He did not need to. Helen handled the nephews. The clause was written. The cedar chest's contents, the letters, the photographs, the bronze star, the unit photograph with 8 names on the back, were designated for Cecilia Vance before the estate closed. He drove to Crestwood Lane on Saturday morning with Duke in the back seat and the box on the seat beside him. He parked in front of 114 and sat for a moment. He had been in rooms with difficult things his whole adult life. This was a different kind of room. Not a crisis, not a loss in progress, but a long, quiet grief arriving finally at its resolution. He owed it his full attention and his silence, unless she needed his words. That was the same thing he had owed every significant moment of his service. Tammy was there when he knocked. She had driven Cecilia to her Saturday hair appointment that morning and had not gone home afterward, which Cecilia had not asked her to do and which Cecilia had clearly expected, because there were 3 cups on the kitchen table. Cecilia Vance was 79 years old and had the posture of a woman who had stood at a public counter for 31 years and known that the work mattered and behaved accordingly. She was dressed carefully. Her hair was done. She shook Darius's hand with a firmness that told him she had decided to receive this morning the way she received everything that mattered, with full attention and her best self present. Duke went to her immediately and sat at her feet and looked up, and she looked down at him for a moment and then put her hand on his head. Darius set the box on the table. He took out the rubber-banded stack first and set it in front of her. She looked at the envelopes. Her own handwriting, 3 letters she had written to Warren over 14 years, kept in a cedar chest with a rubber band. She did not pick them up. She looked at them. He took out the photograph of the 2 of them, the one Duke had found behind the kitchen panel. C and W, October 1994, and Warren's handwriting on the back, and set it beside the letters. Cecilia looked at the photograph for a long time. She was not crying. She was doing what she had always done with important things, looking at them fully, receiving them with full attention. She said, "He had the same hands at 70 that he had at 40. She was not describing the photograph. She was remembering. Darius put the bronze star on the table. He put the unit photograph beside it. He said, "The man 3rd from the left, in the front row." On the back, his handwriting. He wrote all their names. Cecilia turned the unit photograph over and read the names. She ran her finger along them slowly, left to right, and then she turned it back to the front and looked at Warren at 21, squinting into the Korean sun, 23 years old in the photograph, and she said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He never talked about it." Darius said, "I know." She said, "I knew it was there. You can always tell, but I never pushed." Darius said, "You were right not to." He said it because he meant it, because he knew the things she was describing from his own life and from the lives of the men he had served beside. The thing you carry that is yours and that you offer when you are ready and that no one has the right to take before then. Last, he took out the letter from the mailbox. Cecilia's letter, the one with the 34-cent flag stamp and the March 2002 postmark, the one that had been in the rural route box for 23 years. He set it in front of her. She looked at her own handwriting on the envelope. She looked at it for a long time. She said, "I didn't know what had happened. I told myself he was busy. Then I told myself he was sick. Then I couldn't tell myself anything anymore, so I wrote." She paused. "I just wanted him to know I was all right. That was all I wanted to say." She looked at the envelope, and then nothing came back. Not the letter, not a reply. I didn't know whether he got it and chose the silence, or whether... She stopped. Darius said, "He didn't get it. He was gone before it arrived. He didn't choose anything." She nodded. It was a small nod, precise. The nod of a woman who has been accounting for a thing for 23 years and has just been given the final entry and can close the ledger. She picked up her own letter and held it. She did not open it. She already knew what it said. She had written it. She sat with it in her hands for a moment, the letter she had written to a man who never received it, and she held it the way you hold something you have been looking for and have finally found, even when what you have found is the shape of what you lost. She looked up at Darius. She said, "Thank you for finding me." He said, "Duke found the mailbox. I just opened it." Tammy took the photograph of Warren and Cecilia to the drugstore and had 2 copies made, one for Cecilia, one for Darius, because Tammy had decided unilaterally that Darius should have one, and she was not wrong. Cecilia framed hers and put it on the mantel beside a photograph of Warren's unit in Korea that Darius had had printed from the image he took of the original, 8 men in the Highland sun. Warren third from the left, his name on the back in his own handwriting. Warren was on her mantel now, in her house, in the county where everyone knew her and no one had known this. The following Sunday, the choir director at Harlan First Baptist, a woman named Paulette who had known Cecilia since 1989, stood at the choir stand before the offertory anthem and said, "Today's anthem is dedicated to the memory of Warren Elgin of Harlan County, who served in Korea and came home and lived a good and quiet life, and who is loved." It was the first time Warren's name had been said publicly in Cecilia's presence. Cecilia sat in the third pew and listened to the music, and did not cry. She had a voice that was still full and true after 44 years of singing, and when the congregation joined the final verse she sang with it, which was for the people who knew her, the answer to every question about whether she was all right. She was. Warren Elgin had kept her letters in a cedar chest beside his bronze star. He had kept her photograph behind the kitchen panel where he could reach it. He had been gone before her last letter arrived, and the letter had waited 23 years in a rural route mailbox for someone to open it. And that someone had a dog who found things. And the dog had gone to the box on the first morning of the job and sat beside it and looked back. Duke had found it. Darius had opened it. The rest had followed from those 2 acts the way most things follow from the decision to pay attention. Not neatly, not quickly, but fully, and in the direction of what was true. There are people in this world who have been carrying a grief that has no public name, a loss that happened privately, that was mourned alone. That could not be explained to anyone, because explaining it would have required saying things that were not theirs to say in that season or that place. Cecilia Vance carried hers for 23 years in a county where she knew everyone, and no one knew this about her. She knows now that she was kept, that a man put her letters in a cedar chest beside the things that mattered most to him, and put her photograph where he could reach it, and kept her in the house the way you keep the things you don't want to live without. She knows it because a Marine opened a mailbox on a rural route in October, and because a dog went to that mailbox first and sat beside it and waited. This story is for everyone who has been carrying a love that had no public name, and for everyone who has written a letter and waited for something to come back. And for the people who find the mailboxes, is there someone in your life who carried something private for too long? A love, a loss, a grief that had no ceremony? Leave their name in the comments. Let this section hold the ones who were loved without witnesses. I read every one. Every story on this channel begins with someone who opens the box. If that means something to you, subscribe. There are more stories to tell, and you'll want to be here for them. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.